Well, here we are again with another episode of Contemplating Resonance. And with me this afternoon, this is the first time I'm doing a daytime recording of this show. So hopefully the lighting and everything is, to everyone's preference. And if you're, not watching the video, you don't care. With me today, Mathieu, and John and I know each other through our church. Do we call it a church, John?
We can. It legally is a church.
It legally is okay. So we're not an illegal church. Good. We're a legal church, and I guess we've known each other now for a little over a year, something like that. But when I announced that I was going to try to start a podcast, and I think I succeeded at least in the starting part. We'll see how far it goes. John was one of the first people to say, pick me, pick me, pick me. So here he is. And I am going to stop talking and let him introduce himself. So take it away, John.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks for letting everyone know just how eager I am to appear on all podcasts. So if anyone out there has your own show and you're desperate for a guest, I am here. I'm waiting. But no, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Matt. Excited to contemplate resonance with you today. But yeah, I'm John Mathieu. I am in Chicago, Illinois. I'm one of the editors for the Christian Century, a magazine that's been around for a long time, a progressive Christian magazine. But then, yeah, my other work, my other gig, which, as you mentioned, Matt, is how we know each other, is at Harbor Online Community, a fully online faith community, very related to faith deconstruction, which I know is largely what we're going to talk about today. It's a community of people, a ragtag group of people who have found each other on the internet, who all have had some kind of deconstruction journey. Most of us have been a part of conservative evangelicalism or fundamentalism in the past, and for one reason or another have broken away from that, and are, some folks who need to be done with that kind of religion are just done with all religion, done with faith, done with spirituality even, and that's fine. That's, people can chart their own journeys. But some folks really miss, whether it's spiritual practices, whether it's being in community with other folks that's rooted in shared values or whatever. There's just parts of the religious experience that some of us miss, and we want to be able to have that, but not be part of toxic, dehumanizing theologies or practices. And so Harbor is our attempt to just figure out how can we do spiritual community, Christianity together in a way that is life-giving and affirming and liberative and progressive. So that's a little bit of me and the work that I do.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on what you were saying about some people, they're done with it all, and others, miss certain aspects. And I think, and this actually even came up, I think, in one of the earlier conversations that I had, that you can go through a progression, and many people do, of, there's the moment when you decide that you're kind of done with where you were. And oftentimes, what you really, you're going to go on a break with God at that point. We're on a break. I'm going to go off here and just be for a while. And that was me. I kind of shut that side of me down, at least to the best of my ability, for a several years. And it was towards the end of 2022 that I realized that, really two things. One is I did miss community, but I also wanted a very specific kind of community, which was people who understood. Whether, and everybody has a unique story. Everybody has a unique thing that represents their background, and then the thing that, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, and then you've got, the things that have come after that. And those are all unique stories, but they have similar shape and they have similar patterns and things that pop in and out. And so you can be talking about something and another person across the room is like, yeah, me. I felt mine was different, but it was the same. And that's kind of what, again, as I was saying, we had our harbor gathering last night when we're recording this, and I was talking about this podcast and other related things during our little sharing time. And I mentioned, and I forgot what I mentioned, like my train of thought just completely derailed. I'm not sure exactly what was I talking about before I got into that, John? Do you remember?
I think just the Substack and the podcast.
But right before that, oh, stories, right? So I want to be this aggregator of stories, right? I want to be like, hey, where is the the Fox's Book of Martyrs equivalent of like deconstruction stories? That's what this is going to be.
Please don't include the drawings from Fox's
no
Book
drawings,
of Martyrs.
no drawings. We've got video podcasts now, so and this is happier outcomes for hopefully all of us, right?
I sure hope so. Yeah,
but I had to drop the Fox's Book of Martyrs reference just because I thought you would appreciate the sheer nerdery of dropping that reference during this conversation.
And I've been scarred by that book, so I'm with you on that. You know what's funny? Like you were mentioning in your own journey, there was that clear break at first. That once you reached the kind of the Rubicon, once you were like, okay, I got to deconstruct. It was like you had that period of like, I'm just totally done with this, and that is a pretty common step for a lot of folks. I didn't get the chance to do that. I've never done that. Because I was a professional Christian.
Right.
I was my paycheck, my entire resume, all of it was tied to ministry. It was tied to evangelicalism, and so that wasn't a part of my story. But it's interesting that clergy, many clergy, have deconstruction journeys of their own, but they usually don't, like me, get the chance to just have the clean break. And I found it interesting throughout each chapter of Harbor. Harbor is not that old, but we've been around for going on 3 years. And there's always been a good number of clergy or former clergy who have found their way to Harbor. And I find it very interesting because, yeah, like you said, similarly shaped stories. It's like there's the church trauma that many people who have been to church have experienced. Then there's like a different shape of church trauma that clergy experience when they are abused in their own religious institutions in one way or another. And so it's interesting that how many pastors and former pastors have found themselves, connecting at Harbor.
And that's been really enlightening for me, actually. Like, I mean, I'm trying to think of another context where I've just kind of hung around with a bunch of clergy where they weren't doing their job, right? And just listening to people talk, because we don't just attract a lot of clergy, we attract a lot of clergy from a lot of different denominational backgrounds. And so I've gotten to learn just little differences here and there, things that I just didn't know. And then again, what behind the scenes, like, what is it like to be? Because I remember as a kid, like, it was like the books I read my kids where it's like the teachers actually live at school. It's like, as far as I knew, like, the clergy actually lived at church. That's what they did. Church is just, they don't have normal lives. They don't do normal things. And in many cases, depending on where you were, they didn't do a whole lot to dissuade you of that belief.
Yeah. And some of them really did live in the church buildings too.
This is true.
That sometimes happens.
This is true. So yeah, that's been, again, like I wrote that we were the island of misfit toys. And I think more than one of us have said that out loud at different times. But I think that's the thing that makes me continue to come back. It's like the one thing that we're bound by this really interesting, weird thing that you wouldn't think would bind a bunch. It's almost like we're bound by our shared trauma. But other than that, we're so different in so many ways. And it's like you just get to, in a very short period of time, interact with so many different and, just amazingly cool people that, well, don't really have any other reason to be together other than, what we're talking about. And I think that's, I don't know. I didn't think that kind of a thing was ever going to exist. Like, and I think a lot of people struggle with this exact topic of feeling like I'm all by myself. There's no one else dealing with this like me. Certainly not anywhere nearby, and probably nowhere in the world, because, we tend to invent often the worst possible form of what it is that we're going through. At least my brain works that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really helpful to bond with people who have had similar difficult experiences that you've had. What I'm really grateful for about Harbor is that it's a pretty positively oriented space, even though we love to sit around and dump on evangelicalism. I mean, and we do often, right? Because we have to process our critiques and our anger, but it's a lot more than that. Like a lot of folks, I think, who deconstruct, who are ex-evangelicals, they leave everything behind. And again, that's totally their prerogative and that's their journey. But a lot of them, like, then don't have that connection. Like you said, it's a lonely place to be. And so what the best that a lot of them can do is find like a Facebook group of just angry ex-evangelicals. And they all they share angry memes with each other. And that can be therapeutic for a little while, but it's not really community. And so for those, this is how we found a lot of the people at first for Harbor, is that I was in those groups sharing the angry memes. But then every once in a while, someone would say, I have to admit, though, I do miss the sense of community, and like I don't really have anything to replace that. And I would just say, like, hey, if you're interested in a Zoom call, we have a Zoom call if you want to meet some other folks. And some of our first people from around the world who joined Harbor were through these kind of ex-evangelical Facebook groups, some of which don't exist anymore, and some of which have frankly gotten so toxic that I can't even really be in them. But important context for the beginning of Harbor.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that absolutely all of these different things have not only their place, but, an important place in the journey. But you can also camp out too long at each of these waypoints and kind of decide, well, I'm just going to, hang out here for this. I don't need, the journey, and that's okay. But you stay there too long, it can start to backfire on you. And I say that about the positive and the negative. Like, we can also try to like sweep all this stuff under the rug and forget and not deal with it and not process it, and then go be whatever this new version of us that we want to be. And then, oh, well, that stuff never went away. Like, it's still back there. It's still nagging at you. So like, it's a balance of, don't hang out too much in the anger, but don't hang out too much in the denial of the things that happen to you either.
Yeah. Don't think you can skip the 10 years of therapy you're going to need to get through it,
Absolutely. But you also have to recognize, at least I did, that I do need to talk about these things in therapy and other venues beyond that, because I didn't realize, how much they were hurting me when I started talking about them, that I had not done so yet. Right? That was one thing that I realized. And then I also realized just how much is down there.
Yeah.
Which is ultimately where this came from. This whole conversation, this whole podcast newsletter is all about all right, time to go find out what all's down there.
And
Tell me about it.
Yeah, it makes no sense. But every time I look for a new one, I'm always, frankly, is well versed in spiritual trauma and these other forms of trauma. And like, I just want them to know, like, we're going to be talking about religion. We're going to be talking about it a lot. And so, hope that's going to work for you. Because it's obviously important to find a good fit. But in terms of like not minimizing the positive and also not minimizing the negative, one of the things I know we try to do in our discussions at Harbor, deconstruction is such a buzzword now. It has been for a long time, and reconstruction is becoming kind of a buzzword too. But we do try to have a balance. At least I do when I'm thinking of discussion questions. Like a very common thing at Harbor is we'll look at a verse from the Bible and we'll ask questions like, how have you seen this verse or verses like this weaponized? How have you seen them used to dehumanize people? But also, how might we read this verse in a new way that is life-giving, that actually works toward freedom and justice and love? And so I think we try to get a good balance of like, we do need to call out the things that have happened and we need to process them, and we can do that with anger, but also it's nice to do some work to reclaim some goodness and some kind of spiritual health in the process.
Yeah. And as a the person who's not organizing things and experiencing them live, like I think that we all do a pretty good job of that. And I mean, I will say occasionally it gets heavy. Occasionally it gets really, really heavy, and it doesn't really ever lighten up. And that's okay too. Sometimes that's exactly what's called for. And I consider those evenings, just as valuable, but you also can't have too many of those in a row before it's like, okay, well, I'm tired. I don't know if I can do that tonight. And I'll admit I can think of one time in particular. I was like, last week was a lot. I think I'm gonna pass on Thursday night this week, because like it. And I think that speaks to the again, it's amazing that you get a bunch of people on Zoom and they trust each other enough to go to that level of vulnerability and transparency and depth and heaviness. Not, I mean, I think, yes, we have a lot of regulars, but we also have people pop in out of nowhere and sometimes share amazing stuff. So it's to me, it's like one of those things where I hate to use. I try to almost use some evangelical catchphrase on almost every episode of this podcast, and what I almost did just now was call it a God thing.
Yeah,
but there's something there, right? Like it. This is a special place. It's not just because of the logistics and the organizing and the content. Like I've tried other online communities. I've visited things that are trying to do similar things, and there's something special about Harbor. And I will say that to anybody at any time.
I mean, for what it's worth, and whether you want to call it God when we get together.
For sure. So, this is, again, an opportunity to get into a story of deconstruction. And we've kind of danced around your story a little bit, but I'd like to invite you to just tell that story and however you want to.
Yeah. We will dance around it no longer. Now we will just march right into this story.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I was a card-carrying evangelical professional. I mean, I was a missionary for years. Then I worked at a large megachurch. So I was really doing it all in terms of evangelical Christianity. And I think it was a series of relationships that caused me to begin the deconstruction journey. Relationships are at the heart of a lot of people's deconstruction stories as well. Like for me, a series of key relationships that developed around the same time or had new chapters around the same time. So I got married, and my wife, though she was also evangelical at the time, she was a feminist. I mean, secretly or not so secretly, but I didn't realize the extent of it. And then we got married, and we started having some really, really frank discussions about gender. And I was at a time in my life, mid to late 20s, where I thought I was right about everything, and I wanted to be right about everything. But I would walk away from these discussions with Ashley, my wife, and I would think to myself, deep down in my heart of hearts, I am dead wrong on this. I am, oh my, like, she is convincing me. This patriarchy thing is terrible. It's so bad. So that was a really important step. Around the same time, I made these two friends in Pittsburgh, where I was living, who were both black men. And this was around the time that a lot of the more nationally televised acts of violence against black people and black men were really gaining prominence. Michael Brown was murdered, and I remember hearing from them how deeply and personally this was affecting them, and they had rage, they had sorrow and anguish. Meanwhile, I watched the same news stories as a white man, and I was like, we'll see how this plays out in the justice system. You know, how unfortunate that this man died, but let's wait till all the facts come in. You know, like I had such a now a reaction I am embarrassed to say, but at the time, this was just how I was conditioned to respond to these race related news items.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but being friends with these two men and talking to them and hearing their reactions and feeling their reactions, it was just like, oh my gosh, I am. This is another thing I am wrong. I'm very wrong about this. I need to start reading things from black people and other people of color, and I need to learn about race from people who are not white. And so that started that part of my deconstruction journey. And to some listeners, it may not be super clear why like race in America has to be a key part of my deconstruction story. And I won't go into maybe hours of theory on this, but basically the white evangelicalism I was a part of was so fused with white supremacy and whiteness that to realize I was wrong about race meant I had to question a lot of the theological assumptions that I held and a lot of the religious practices I was doing. So, and then the final piece is my sister. Around the same time, my sister came out. So she was at that time in her early to mid 20s and maybe early 20s, but relatively late in life to come out. I mean,
sure,
it was kind of the worst kept secret in our family. Like my mom and I had many conversations about the fact that clearly my sister was gay, but she didn't want to tell us. She had many reasons for not telling us. And when she finally did, it, you know, totally changed some of the dynamics. I mean, we had been a family that was like loving and accepting and tolerant in like very vague terms, but like we never took a stand on anything in terms of being like, we're LGBTQ affirming, because we just had a very heteronormative kind of like vibe.
You're just not homophobic.
Well,
right?
yeah.
Right?
We would just establish we weren't super homophobic. That was the bare minimum, I guess. So
yeah,
from a work perspective, though, and my sister said that one of the reasons she waited to come out for a while was that she was afraid the ramifications it would have for my work.
And that's a real fear.
Yeah,
that's a very real fear.
Yes, it may not make that much sense to someone who hasn't spent time inside the evangelical bubble, but for those who have, yeah, it's very clear. Because yeah, to stand in solidarity with her, even in my private life, even just when I'm at home, like being a loving brother and supporting my sister as a lesbian, like that is not acceptable to my employers at the time.
Correct.
Right?
I don't even have to know them to know you're correct.
Yes. So that obviously, in my full unfettered like solidarity with my sister and meeting all of her friends we had never met before who are all LGBTQ, it was just like, okay, I need to deconstruct everything related to my theology that has to do with sex, marriage, sexuality. And so, yeah, those relationships with my wife, with my new friends who are Black, with my sister coming out, those are the things that really prompted me to go on this journey. And on the one hand, it feels like slow, like I dragged my feet, like I put it off as long as I could because I was getting a paycheck from this church. On the other hand, it feels very rapid. Like once one domino falls, it's like not long before you're like, do I believe anything anymore? Do I want to have anything to do with any of these institutions? So for me, I guess just to fast forward, I started to slowly try to leave the church that I was at. I came up with an exit plan with my boss, and I started going to seminary full time and working at the church part time. And I went to a progressive seminary. So I was starting to transition out, and then they fired me in the middle of that process. So it became easy to leave at that point because I had no choice. But the definitive moment, the key moment in all of this that I sometimes tell people about, the story about, is like I was in this long ordination process. So long, so painful, so awful. But at the very, very end, I finally was getting to the end. And it actually looked like it was going to be successful. This evangelical church, they were going to ordain me. Even though I had deconstructed like so many things, I was like, for career purposes, this would be a good move.
Sure.
So I'm like at the finish line, and they ask me, is there any area, any whatsoever, that you can think of where you disagree with our church in terms of its beliefs or its practices? And I'm just like sitting there like, well, there's a million. Like,
would you give us a get out of jail free card, please?
Right. Exactly. It was such a setup. I mean, they clearly wanted me to give them a reason not to ordain me. And it was like, it felt like a moment of like temptation, right? Because gosh, it would have been convenient for me from a job perspective, from an employment perspective, to just say, nope, we're all good, and they could just ordain me, and then I could figure out leaving the church with an ordination on my resume. And this is, again, this feels very like cynical, sort of, that I viewed it that way. And at this point, I was just hanging on for dear life at this church and with my faith and with my career. So I'm not proud of my mindset back then, but that was kind of part of my mindset. And I told him, like, yeah, there's definitely one that we should probably talk about, which is LGBTQ. And so that was the straw that broke the camel's back from their perspective. Me basically being unwilling to be homophobic. And yeah, so that's a little bit of my journey. I was so lucky to have that experience, deconstruct, be fired, and be married to someone who had like a good career going. So I was able to go like full time to seminary, get a degree, get a job. Starting Harbor was like something that happened organically during the latter part of my seminary. It was never meant to even be a thing until it just kind of took on new life of its own, and it became what it is today. But yeah, so that's a little bit of my deconstruction story.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting. Like as you're describing some of these moments, like it's almost like the words don't do it enough justice. To like, gosh, what must it have felt like to be in that moment, confronted with that question, knowing that the way you answer it is going to mean very different things for your life, for your finances, for your everything.
Yeah.
And we kind of went through that, but yeah, like I kind of just want to hold that for a second.
Yeah, thanks. Well, in that moment, it's worth exploring more. I've explored it a lot. I was able to do a little storytelling, like moth style storytelling, at this queer storytelling church in Chicago, as they fashion themselves, and it was Super
Can you tell
fun.
me what that means? Because I don't know what that means.
Yeah. So it's a church called Gilead. Anyone in the Chicago area should check it out. They're a queer storytelling bar church. That's how they brand themselves, because they
Okay.
typically meet in bars. What it means for them to be queer, I think like just most of the people are queer, but I mean they just embrace queerness as like a way of being. And storytelling is a big part of like their gatherings. So that's that piece of it. They and by Moth style, Moth is like a storytelling organization approach. I don't know. It's like
Okay.
it's like a tight five. Like you craft a story that's about 5 minutes long, and then it's essentially memorized or read. It's not extemporized at all.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and so those are the kind of stories they tell. Like at Harbor, we do a ton of storytelling, but it's almost all extemporaneous. I mean, people are just
Right.
unmuting and sharing some of their story. At Gilead, it's like people with MFAs who are like writing incredible little stories.
Okay.
You're
Okay.
laughing, you're crying. I mean, it's a totally different experience, but it's cool. Um, so I wrote this story version of this moment when I was meeting with my
Oh,
ordination
wow.
committee, and what one of the things I highlighted in the longer version of the story. I don't know that I told it at the church, but I had a longer version. I cut it down. But one of the things about this story that's remarkable to me is even in my full evangelical mode that I was still kind of in at that point, deconstructed evangelical mode, this was a super significant moment for my faith. Not just my career, not just my finances, though those things also, like you said. Um, I feared this moment for so long because I knew the writing was on the wall for this moment for years. And finally, I'm at a point where I'm asked a question that will change the trajectory of my career. It's going to get me fired eventually. And I feared it. And I told him, I do disagree with the church on this. We need to talk about this. He said, we're never going to ordain you unless you can sign off on the statement homosexuality is sin. And I said, I'm never signing off on that statement. And he's like, well, then we're never ordaining you. He got up and left this meeting. And as he walked away, and I just like sat back alone in this cafe, I felt closer to Jesus than I had
Mm.
felt in years, right? Closeness to Jesus is not even a category that I like even use anymore. Like right now,
Sure.
that's not something I would say. But at the time, that's how I understood that moment. I felt like God's love embraced me. And it was like, it's not like a story where I'm a hero. Like this is like me just finally taking one step in the right direction after
Sure.
years of terrible theology, terrible ministry decisions that I made. Um, but just in taking one step, like one small step in solidarity with like people who have been suffering for so long at the hands of church leaders, that was enough for me to just feel like God was there with me, like close to me. And yeah, so that is something about that moment I like to
It
remember.
sounds suspiciously like the way we describe repentance,
Mm,
right? Like you kind of finally stopped officially going down one path.
hmm
Like, I mean, you've been meandering around trying, but this was the moment that you turned around and said, "Well, I mean, there's no like you can't look back. Like you just burned your bridges, and you're going this other way."
Yeah, yeah. Repentance. That's a good.
Something just popped into my head while you were saying about being close to Jesus, but that's not really something that you typically say or think. And then I brought up repentance, and there's this language thing that I don't know if you struggle with. I struggle with. I have a lot of close associations between certain feelings or states of mind and language that I was provided by the evangelical church. And two things happen. One, I feel that feeling from something that is completely outside of that context, and my brain says the evangelical language. And I'm like, no, not that. That's not what it is. But then, especially when we have, and when I say we, I mean people who have gone through these types of journeys, when we use the language that we learned, it helps us communicate about the things much more quickly that we dealt with than, like, if I'm trying to explain what evangelical church trauma is to someone who has no context for the evangelical church, it's a lot of work because there's so much there that you just have to build up from scratch. And so I'm wondering, like, is that something that you've ever spent any time thinking about? Because I do. Okay, language is like one of my neurodivergent special interests. Like, I geek out on language. I buy books on dialects. I'm weird. And I love it. But I've thought about this one a lot, that we have a language challenge.
Yeah, no, I'm certainly into words and language as well. I mean, I edit a magazine, in my other job, so I care about it a lot. Well, but also just in the work of Harbor, there's questions about which phrases to use during our gatherings and which phrases not to use. But yeah, this is a great question. So in the example, like in the story I was just sharing, I have no problem saying, like, I look back and I think that I was feeling God's love. But
Right.
Looking back and saying now that I felt close to Jesus, I mean, that's not like a horrible phrase. Like I kind of like still have some think there's some value in that. But like certain phrases I'm totally okay with, and I will still use them, and I'll still use them in mostly the same ways I did when I was evangelical. And then other phrases I'm like, no, get away from me. Like having a personal relationship with Jesus is something that I just decided had to be completely jettisoned. So any phrase that reminds me of that, I'm like, I'm super skeptical of. But it's funny. It's like my beliefs in some ways haven't changed that much through my deconstruction journey. Some of the beliefs I held on to, some of them that were reconstructed, like I believe in God. I'm very hopeful of like the resurrection of the body. Like I'm like I think the Bible is a really, like, I'm not inerrant, but like a gift from God. Like so I'm very like sometimes people are very skeptical of Harbor or of deconstruction, and they kind of try to ask me if there's anything I still believe in. And I'm like, well, I mean, I'm a Christian. I identify as a Christian, and I believe in like the tenets of Christianity. So
Sure.
I like all of them pretty much wholesale. But but when I say that, I do not mean U.S. white evangelical Christianity. I mean like my best understanding.
I think this is part of the challenge, is that there is a public face of this thing that is white evangelical, and we can get into the Christian national, there's a spectrum there as well, right? Not everyone is marching with torches, but maybe they're not that bothered by people who are. I don't know. But of course, they're using all of the language that I've been talking about and you've been talking about. And so very often when I'm in, again, I'll be in like mixed company of people who, not a bunch of deconstructionists, and it feels very weird and awkward to start saying, Jesus words, because, oh my God, are they going to think I'm one of those people? Because I'm not. But I still very much have a relationship with, I don't know what it is. I have a relationship with a lot of things and a lot of ideas and but yeah, Jesus is still part of Jesus was such a core part of my experience for more than half of my life. I can't just jettison that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, on the topic of like what counts as Christianity and what doesn't, I have some pretty strong feelings about this. I wrote a blog post about it a while back. I think people who identify as Christians are Christians. And it's very upsetting to those of us who don't want to be associated with them, but we have to deal with it. So this is just my take on this. Like, because, you know, we look at January 6th, the insurrection, and you see the flags that say Jesus saves, and then the flags next to them that say Trump, you know, still my president or whatever. You see the nationalism, you see the horrible stuff done in the name of Jesus, and the impulse is to say that's not Christianity. Like, that's not real Christianity. Mine is real, theirs is fake. Mine is good, theirs is bad. And Christianity, therefore, is a good religion because I am practicing it in this way. That is what counts as real. The horrible stuff you're seeing on the news that is pretending to be Christianity is fake Christianity. But it's so convenient to do this. And they're just doing it in the opposite direction to us. Like, I think the healthier, more difficult path is to just say Christianity is it's a series of practices, beliefs, and belonging that is very complex, but very flexible. And in all these different places and times, it finds very, very different expressions. And some of those we could say are bad. They are doing bad in the world. And we can denounce them even. But we denounce them as bad, not as this doesn't count as actual Christianity. We don't just get to say what is and what isn't. That's the gatekeeping. That's just a different type of gatekeeping than the gatekeeping that we did about beliefs, particular beliefs, when we were evangelicals. So look, the people who stormed the Capitol, who did it with Jesus flags and Jesus hats and Jesus shirts, they're Christians. And that's hard for me to say that I'm also a Christian. But my Christianity is different from theirs. There are reasons why I practice my type of Christianity and not their type, and I have critiques about their type, but it's not so simple as just saying they have a fake version of my religion. Thank you for letting me go on this just almost unhinged rant.
I don't think it was that unhinged, John, because, I mean, I actually think that you took some, I don't know, vague, fuzzy, bad feeling that I had in my mind when I would read language like that. Because, like, it always rubs me the wrong way anytime I see something written off as, well, that's not real. It doesn't even have to be real X, real blank. Because to me, that's an easy way to avoid a lot of issues. You can just say, oh, well, they're not really the thing. And so therefore the thing is still cool and it's still good and still perfect and still doesn't, we don't have to worry about it. The thing is fine. Christianity's fine.
Yeah.
Because they're not Christian.
Right.
And and nothing is fine.
Yeah. It's really the it's just the no true Scotsman fallacy, right?
Yes.
Which is like,
yes.
Which, if I remember, for any listeners who maybe aren't familiar with it, I think it goes something like, someone says, no Scotsman likes sugar in their tea, and then someone says, oh, but my uncle's from Scotland and he loves sugar in his tea, and then the first person says, oh, well, no true Scotsman likes sugar in his tea. You know, like, it's like you're moving the goalpost to try to make your point.
Exactly. It's easy to move the goalpost around such that you are in the in group and everyone else is not.
Yeah.
And the in group again is fine because it's me.
And people like me.
Yeah, and I may have problems. We're not going to talk about that. This is really interesting. Where I didn't expect. I don't know what to expect when I get into these conversations, and I didn't expect to end up here. But you're actually touching on a lot of things that have kind of been in my head, but I haven't really sat down and said, okay, let's think about this. So now you've given me this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no, this is great. You didn't have no true Scotsman on your bingo card for this conversation.
I really didn't, but which is funny that you should mention no true Scotsman, because I'm doing a lot of ancestry research, and I found this whole. So apparently, if I'm doing this right, and the records that the LDS Church Family Search have are accurate. My 11th grandfather was the mayor of Edinburgh.
Wow. That's
In
legit.
like the 1600s. Like, so, and then you keep going further. I mean, and the further back you go, I'm just like, I don't know who put all this data together, but you can get it. There's a couple of kings of Scotland in there, and you're just like, am I Scottish royalty? Well,
Wow.
why not? Who's going to tell me I'm not?
Right. But do you like sugar in your tea? Because that's the real test.
I drink my tea black, I guess, even though I drink my tea green.
Okay.
I don't really put stuff in tea. When I have done like just regular like English tea times, I very often will do the milk and sugar thing just because it just tastes, it's like a tea flavored dessert.
Yeah.
And like I really like Thai iced tea.
Oh my gosh, I could drink that stuff till I die, which would be about three cups in because of the sugar. But my goodness,
right,
so good,
exactly. So, but yeah, if I'm just gonna make a cup of tea, I've recently started putting cream in my coffee again, but that's literally just to cut the strength a little bit of the because I make it kind of strong, and I feel like I put a little cream in there, it just softens it up a little bit, but not sugar. Now, back in the day when I first became a quote unquote coffee drinker, I had all the junk in it, and I used to get all the Starbucks beverages that had more of everything but coffee than and but then I started drinking pour overs, and I realized, oh, if you make the coffee well, you actually don't need all that other stuff for it to taste good.
Yeah, I feel that way about French press too. It's really good on its own.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've got a French press, I got a Chemex, I got all those things.
Yeah,
I'm a bit of a coffee snob.
My coffee drinking's weird because I like it really strong, but then I do like to load it up with sweetener and cream. I can have it black too. But it's got to have both or neither. I can't put just cream or just sweetener. Yeah.
Interesting. I don't even know how to describe the flavor. It's like coffee with cream is a flavor. Like I can't.
Yeah.
And you put sugar in, totally different drink at that point. Wow. Did not expect that. Was not on my bingo card either. Was for us to get into from No True Scotsman to our coffee preferences.
Well, whoever's making bingo cards for contemplating resonance has a tall task. I mean, like, I don't think there's ever a way to predict what's going to come up here.
That's the cool thing about it. Is like I wanted to come up with a title that was both profound and yet did not box me in any way.
Nice.
It's like I reserve the right to change the direction of the podcast at any time. But so far, everything seems to be lining up to be exactly in the wheelhouse of what I wanted this to be. So let's see, we're at 49 minutes. Okay. I want to take a slightly different turn. We've talked a lot about deconstruction. We've talked a lot about Harbor. We haven't talked too much about your day job, which is also pretty interesting to me. I on your name's credit, I decided to become a subscriber to the Christian Century, and not knowing that the magazine existed, because evangelicals don't know about magazines.
That's right.
And which is a whole other topic. Like, it's like there needs to be a deconstruction 101 out there. It's like when you hit that Rubicon moment that it just kind of drops out of the sky and said, okay, you're going to be fine. Here's what you need to do. Here's where you need to go. Here's what you need to read. But so you don't panic, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like I did not know that I could get a magazine that has Christian in the title and yet is just so diverse in the topic areas that y'all cover. I mean, everything's at least tangentially related to spirituality, but I mean, I read a whole amazing article on like church window architecture and stuff, and I'm just
Hmm.
like, I didn't even know I was going to get this stuff. This is great, and for a nerd like me, it's really great. So I'd love to hear more about what you do there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah. I had not heard of the Christian Century until I got to seminary later in life, a progressive seminary. And that just shows you how closed off evangelicalism is. Um, the magazine started in the 1880s, and in the early 20th century, there was this massive split in the U.S. church between the social gospel movement and the
Right.
fundamentalists. And the Christian Century quickly became kind of the voice and the magazine of the social gospel movement side of U.S. Christianity, the progressive liberal side. And then as time went on, that became kind of the mainline Protestant traditions, were the heirs of that movement. And it's got an amazing history. I mean, like the the Christian Century was the first place to publish Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail. Um, Now, the thing
Really?
that happened, of course, in the U.S. was liberal Protestant Christianity began to wane a lot in like 1960s to today. It's been on a steep downhill. And so as liberal and progressive Christianity has begun to shrink, so has the magazine that is the voice of those traditions. So
Sure.
that's one of the reasons people haven't heard of it. But yeah, I love the magazine. Um, so what I do there, I'm the community engagement editor. Like all the editors, I do some work on the magazine itself and what goes into it. Coming up with editing pieces, getting writers to come in. But I'm way less focused on that part of it. I am focused on the people who read the magazine. So I do the letters to the editor section in each issue. But then beyond that, I do just everything that involves like connecting with human beings. So our social media, our email newsletters, we have several really great free newsletters that go out each
Mm.
week. I get to write one of them, and then I just kind of put together all of them. In the one that I write, and I only mention this because it's one of the more interesting parts of my job, but in the one that I write, I always leave a little discussion question, and I invite people to write me back their response. And the people, who have the time and the inclination to do this regularly tend to be like older folks who are retired. A lot of our readers are former clergy, widows or widowers who maybe also could clergy spouses. Um, so I have become, by doing this part of my job, I have become pen pals
Yeah, that's
with
what I was
like,
thinking the whole time.
yeah, I've become pen pals with these like fascinating older folks around the world. There are a few in particular who almost always write me back, and I look forward to it. I look forward to hearing like what they think about the topic of the week, and so it's really cool. Our writers are incredible. We have writers, diverse set of writers across, diverse in terms of age, um, race, gender, sexuality, and then like religious background and different traditions, even some different religions. Um, but writing about, like you said, writing about such a diverse set of topics and themes, and it's really thoughtful. The tie that really just binds it together is the quality of the writing. We're really like
Right.
pretty high bar for like really good thoughts and good writing, and so I'm proud of it. It's like it's nice to be able to do a job and just be proud of the product that you put out. Like I love reading our magazine, and I'm excited that other people get to read it. And I'm excited that like of all the editors that work on the magazine, I think in some ways I have the coolest gig because I get to meet the actual people who are reading the magazine and learn their stories and learn like why they like our magazine and so yeah, that's a bit of my day job.
Yeah, like that is so cool. Like that people,
People
you know, write to
write to
you.
you.
Like people don't write. Like the other day, I forget who it was. Mentioned something about wanting pen pals, and I'm just like, gosh, I want pen pals.
Mm-hmm.
I like to write. Like writing is my primary mechanism of communication, mainly because when I see my words, I realize what I'm saying a lot more than when I just speak my words. Like I will write something. No, I don't want to say it like that, and I'll move things, and it's just and by the time I'm done, I'm like, okay, yeah, this represents what was jumbled up here. Rarely what comes out the first time, which is why I said, this podcast is primarily either other people talking or it's going to be me rambling about God knows what. And really nothing in between. Like it's one of those. And so if you're wanting Contemplating Resonance, the polished version, you want to go to the newsletter. But if you want the raw, uncut, unfiltered, you want to come to the podcast. Because I feel like they're different. I've got both sides to me, but they need different channels.
Yeah. What this is I don't know why I'm just circling back to this, but when I was talking about the history of the magazine, I forgot one little nugget that might be really meaningful to if you have some ex-evangelical listeners, which I'm guessing you do. In the 50s, Billy Graham and a couple other luminaries of the early evangelical movement in the U.S. founded the magazine Christianity Today, which is much more familiar to evangelical folks. And when he founded it, he said it many times. He's written it in multiple books. It's on Christianity Today's website. He said, the Christian century had given conservative Christians in the U.S. such a bad name that we needed a magazine of our own. And so we started Christianity Today. So in a sense, I'm sorry that our work did lead to that product that I do not think is good for the world. But in my own personal opinion, I'm not speaking for the magazine, just me, John Mathieu. I don't like Christianity Today. But it's also a cool badge of honor for me. I'm like, okay, yeah, we were giving conservative Christianity such a bad name that they needed their own magazine.
Y'all were Billy Graham's enemy number one at some point.
His nemesis.
You were at the top of the most wanted list. Like to me, I'm here for that badge of honor. I'm here for that little factoid.
Yeah, it's funny when you read about the history of the Christian century, though. Which I did because there's one book that a historian wrote about the history of our magazine, so I read it, which is Alicia Kaufman. It's a great book. But our take on Billy Graham was so sort of insulting and ultimately wrong. The magazine was sort of like, oh, he's a flash in the pan. Like, we don't really have to worry about him. We don't really have to write about him very much to try to oppose what he's doing, because he'll just be gone in a few years. And it's like, well, Billy Graham certainly got the last laugh there.
You pretty much guarantee the opposite anytime you say that about somebody. Mm-hmm. I mean, Billy Graham, Donald Trump, all these, they're not. Oops.
Yeah.
Billy Graham is no stranger to Contemplating Resonance. This will be the second Billy Graham reference that we've had, first in the newsletter and now on the podcast. So,
okay.
Common themes keep arising. Well, anyway, I'm looking at the time clock here, and I'm trying to keep these episodes around an hour or less, and we are coming up against that line. So, but we've had a fantastic conversation, I think.
I agree.
And before we drop, what I would love to do is give you an opportunity to point people to web addresses or social media accounts or whatever, where we can find out, more about John and what John cares about.
Yeah, I would just only point people to the websites for the two organizations we have discussed here today. The first one being Harbor Online Community. So the website is onlineharbor.org. A little confusing because the order of the words is different in the name of the organization and the website. So it's onlineharbor.org. Feel free to check that out. And then christiancentury.org is the URL for the magazine. And on the Christian Century website, there's a button at the top where you can sign up for these free newsletters. It's just an orange little thing at the top, across the top, that says free newsletters. That would be my top recommendation, because those email newsletters will send out free articles to read, and like I said, I write one of them, so you can hear from me. But yeah, thanks for the invitation. Those are the two websites I would love to point people to.
Awesome. And yeah, and I get a couple of those different newsletters. I know I get at least one or two. And that's probably just because of what I happen to sign up for in the moment. But I actually want to go check out and see if there's anything that I'm missing. Because the ones that I do get are great. And when I do have enough energy in me on Sunday mornings, occasionally we get together and talk about one of those newsletters, and that's a lot of fun too. Those discussions, all the Harbor discussions, there's just interesting and cool nuggets that you learn from people and just their slants on these things. So it's like it's another version of a really cool book club like experience, except it's a magazine.
Yeah, well, and that's a cool thing you brought up. A nice note to end on, because the two different parts of my work life collide every week. Every weekend we get together for a Harbor discussion group where we talk about an article from the Christian Century, and that's pretty fun for me every week.
Yeah, and I guess that can't hurt. The feedback you get from that can't hurt in preparing future editions of that thing. So it's like a whole feedback cycle that you're getting the benefit from there. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Well, with that, I will get all, of course, the different things we've talked about in the show notes. And of course, there's also a transcript and all the fun things that we have with modern podcasting. So you should easily find your way to anything that we talked about that sounded interesting. And if not, please let me know. But with that, I will, for the first time at the end of this show, instead of saying good night to you, I will say good afternoon, and we will see you on another episode.